Hi, everyone. Welcome to the September 29th, 2022 Provider Conference Call. I'm Shannon Flowers, Chief Juvenile Trial Counsel here at OPDS. We do want to remind everyone, I don't think we've got the recording started yet, but we do typically record these and want everybody to be aware that if you stay on with us, then you are consenting to being recorded as part of the meeting. With that, we'll go ahead and get going on our agenda for today. We did want to highlight two new staff that have joined OPDS in the last month. On September 1st, Katie Schofield joined OPDS as a data analyst. Katie comes to OPDS from the Oregon State Police, where she worked as both a public service representative and as an administrative specialist. In both of those positions, Katie was responsible for managing the electronic reporting of dispositions program, reviewing technical court disposition data submitted by up to more than 100 users, and orienting, training, and advising users in an effort to improve the quality of the data submitted. And then on Monday, just this week, Carla Edmondson joined OPDS Appellate Division as a deputy defender in the criminal appellate section. And she came to OPDS from practicing recently in Louisiana. So please join us in welcoming both Katie and Carla to OPDS and the public defense community in Oregon. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our budget and finance manager, Ralph Amador.
Good afternoon, Ralph Amador, Budget and Finance. I don't have to say for the record anymore because it's not a commission meeting. I'd like to, so again, our accounts payable staff's been working really hard and doing a terrific job. They're still at 27 days and they're trying to get it down as best they can to make sure folks get their things they need. Again, our goal is 30 days, so we're under 30 days, and 30 days is not from us. 30 days is submission of sorry. Our normal invoice inquiry portals are still open. If you got questions, you can send it to accounts payable pbs.state.or.us. If there's invoice inquiry, please include your invoice number, case number, and email title line so we can help do the processing at that point. If you're experiencing billing issues longer than 30 days or something got lost, please direct that email to the opds.ap.ap invoice issues at OPDS, and it's on the screen right now, so you can see that. And again, if you have any questions about case support services, send those to the case support services email, which is css@opds.state.or.us. Again, a big thank you to the AP staff and for their working hard. Again, we welcome your questions and your input, the good ones and the bad ones, so we can try and get better. Thanks a lot. I'll hand it over to Lori now.
Lori, you're muted.
This probably is helpful to take me off unmute. Welcome everyone. I am Lori Bender and I'm the Chief Criminal Trial Counsel at OPDS. And I am going to provide an update of the unrepresented persons issue. There has been a Oregon Judicial Department website that maintains a current list of the numbers of unrepresented throughout the state. That OJD website just basically provides the out of custody and the in custody numbers by county. Additional information the agency is able to access, which includes the case names and the case numbers. But currently, it appears that we have in custody, our numbers are 54 for in custody unrepresented clients. The majority of the unrepresented clients currently are in Multnomah and Washington counties. We have somewhere near 780 out of custody individuals, excluding those individuals that are currently in warrant status. For the past several months, the agency and PDSC have been working to try to resolve the unrepresented persons crisis. In approximately July, the agency worked out and prepared and presented a 4-part plan which addressed the unrepresented persons. That plan was presented to the commission, and in late July, the commission approved Part 1 and Part 2 of the agency's 4-part plan. Part 1 was authorizing compensation at a hourly rate of $158 an hour for the in-custody unrepresented clients who faced criminal charges, adult criminal and juvenile delinquency charges. The commission also approved a plan to provide compensation to the nonprofit public defender offices for training and supervision. Part 3 and Part 4 of that plan were not acted on by the commission. Basically, Part 3 was an incentive to increase MAC within both the nonprofit PD offices and the consortium to 1.0, and to give an overall increase in compensation to the entities. And Part 4 of that plan was a quick response unit proposal that would authorize the employment of, up to 16 lawyers that could be deployed to various locations throughout the state to address the unrepresented client issue and other issues facing public defense with the lack of qualified counsel to address some of the more serious complex cases. Anyway, the PDSC deferred on those 2 parts of the plan. In the interim, PDSC has wanted to come up with other potential resolutions to the unrepresented persons crisis, and yesterday at the commission meeting had a discussion around some additional concepts that they're interested in the provider community comments and positions. So I'm going to put up on the screen the additional concepts that were discussed and presented by Commissioner Nash at the PDSC commission meeting. The first concept was discussed a little bit in a provider conversation, but if you'll go to the next slide. This slide indicates the counties that either currently have unrepresented clients or that the agency believes will soon have unrepresented clients. As you can see, Washington, Multnomah, and Marion County are 3 of the 4 counties that were targeted early on with the emergency funding money. Lane County is not currently red because they have been able to keep the in-custody unrepresented down to 0 and have very few out-of-custody unrepresented clients, at least currently. The counties, however, that we are experiencing increasing numbers of unrepresented persons are Coos, Douglas, Josephine, Jackson. We believe Klamath and Lake County will have problems, as will Benton, Polk, Lynn counties. So with that in mind, we are looking at ways to increase MAC in those targeted areas to meet the current need and this projected need meaning in the next 60 to 90 days. So the first concept on the next slide, Shannon, if you can, okay, is for increase, is directed at the consortia and also firms that have attorneys that are less than 1.0 MAC. And the idea here is that we would compensate any entity or individual within a firm who increases their MAC by 0.10. This of course assumes that they are less than 1.0 MAC currently, and we would compensate the entity or that firm at a 0.2 MAC funding for that 0.1 increase MAC. If a person or entity has a person who can increase by 0.2, then the funding would be compensated at 0.4. There would be a provider could not, an individual provider could not exceed a 1.0 MAC and therefore could not be funded at more than a 1.20 MAC. Now, this would apply to those entities that are within the targeted areas on the map that was just displayed. If you're in an area that's outside of those targeted areas, but you are willing to travel and take case assignments in the targeted areas, then we would increase the compensation by 2.5 times. So if you're a 0.1 MAC, if you go up a 0.1 MAC, you would be compensated at 0.25. If you go up 0.2 MAC, you would be compensated at 0.5 MAC. This compensation would only be for the remainder of the 2022-23 contract period. And the contract administration fee would increase proportionally only to the increase in the actual MAC increase. If you are a new provider and you are willing to take cases in the targeted jurisdictions, then we would give you an increased compensation for the 0.2 MAC. Say you come in as a 0.5 MAC contract, then your funding would be at a 0.70 MAC. So you would get the benefit of the 0.40 funding increase in compensation for the first 0.2 MAC of your contract. This would be on a first come, first served basis with, of course, the priority placed on contractors in jurisdictions with the unrepresented persons that we currently know from the OJD database. So that's the first concept. We know that there are pros and cons with this concept. We would like to be able to summarize the pros and cons to the commission for this concept, and therefore we would request any kind of written comment from the provider community with respect to this particular concept. If we can go to the next slide. The second concept that was presented by Commissioner Nash is for new attorney recruitment bonuses. This would be only available to the nonprofit public defender offices, and the perceived need or the actual need behind this is that there are vacancies currently in certain nonprofit public defender offices statewide. This would help facilitate the hiring of attorneys to either fill the vacancies that are currently either funded or unfunded, or bring new attorneys to those areas that we also project an unmet need, or we project that there will be an unmet need in the near future. So this relates to new attorneys in the nonprofit public defender offices, The bonus is proportional to the attorney's max. So if an attorney comes in at 0.5, the bonus would be 0.5 of that bonus. So 50% of that bonus. There would be 2 bonuses if you brought in someone before the end of the year, and the bonus would be available then after 3 months or so from the new hire, and again a second bonus March 31st before the end of the contract period. The third concept that was presented by Commissioner Nash is a concept that would provide for experienced criminal defense attorneys willing to provide supervision to the private civil bar attorneys or newer attorneys who have not yet met the minimum qualifications to independently provide public defense representation. And those people who have expressed an interest in providing representation in misdemeanor and lesser felony cases with supervision. There have been relatively few individuals from the civil bar that have been willing to take a misdemeanor or lesser felony case, mostly because they don't have the supervision within their office, and they would need some supervision to be able to take any of these unrepresented out of custody clients. The supervised attorney would be someone within the civil bar or a newer attorney, as I mentioned, and the experienced criminal defense attorney who would offer the supervision would have to be at least major felony qualified for 5 years and would have had experience providing representation as court-appointed counsel. This concept is not fully developed, but it is an idea that the Chief Justice and members of the Commission are interested in pursuing. The fourth concept presented by Commissioner Nash is an increased investigator rate to $75 an hour, which is consistent with the CJA panel rate for investigators. There is an $85 rate for investigators who are bilingual, but for just the regular investigators, the rate with the CJA panel is $75 an hour. And the idea behind this is that there's a perception that CJA panel attorneys might be more willing to take the unrepresented in-custody clients at $158 an hour if their investigators were also compensated at the same rate that the CJA panel compensates investigators. So this idea would be an expansion of the current $158 an hour program. It would apply to investigator services as of the date that PDSC authorizes this expansion, and it would apply to any service after the date of the PDSC approval. So existing CSS requests and authorizations for investigators on current 158 hourly rate programs would not increase until the authorization was utilized by that investigator. So that's just an expansion of the 158 an hour program. And the final concept presented by Commissioner Nash is a concept that's in response to the provider meeting that we had more than a week ago. And basically it allows for entities to produce a written proposal for an amount of money or additional funding that is tied to increased capacity. So it is asking for the entity to actually, put down in writing a thoughtful, proposal for how increased funding would increase capacity to address the current unrepresented person issue. So, for instance, I think Commissioner Nash suggested, like, if an entity is restrained in terms of adding more attorneys because of their physical space, but they had an idea for how to increase their physical space, that they could present a proposal for how they could increase their physical space to bring in additional attorney capacity and tie that to how they could increase the capacity to handle more cases. So those are the 5 concepts that were presented by Commissioner Nash. You can refer back to the PDSC Commission meeting that was held yesterday and listen to the recording and listen to the different commissioners' questions about each of these concepts. But the idea is to get these concepts out to the provider community, to get the provider community's comments, their criticisms, their suggestions about how these concepts might be improved, and maybe even to prioritize these concepts. But the commission very much wants to be able to take action very quickly on a concept that makes the most sense, that will address the unrepresented persons crisis, and that will be able to be presented to the legislature in terms of, whether these concepts worked or didn't work, or, how they impacted the numbers of unrepresented persons in the state, whether they were effective at addressing the problem or whether they were not effective. And then we can discuss other options for addressing the problem. So that will conclude my presentation.
Thanks, Lori.
Yeah.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about where we are with the contract reporting and give you all an update. I think, as many of you may know, we've been working on refining the reporting template and drafting a fairly comprehensive manual to provide guidance to you all on how to complete those reports. I do want to give a shout out and many thanks to Kevin Hoopy, who is our Deputy Juvenile Trial Counsel, Aaron Severe, who's Deputy Criminal Trial Counsel, and Kimber Sexton, who's a Senior Policy Analyst, for all of their hard work on this project. They've put the most time, certainly other agency staff that has been involved in this project, but they have certainly been the leads and have put in the most time. So without them, we would not be where we are with reporting. We were able to get all the PCRP reporting, the template and the PCRP portion of that reporting manual out to PCRP providers last month, and started receiving reports in September for PCRP providers. So thank you to any of you, any PCRP providers who are on the call with us today for getting those in. To all of our non-PCRP providers, we thank you for your patience as we've worked to try to finalize the reporting template and manual. We're in our final round of testing now. That will wrap up tomorrow, and assuming things continue to go well and as planned, we plan to have the reporting template and manual out to you all on Monday next week. So with that, then July, August, and September reports will be due on October 20th. We recognize that that is a very short turnaround for completing 3 months worth of reports. So if you are unable to meet that October 20th deadline, please just contact your analyst and we'll work with you regarding an extension to submit those reports. Does anyone have any questions specifically about the contract reporting at this point? All right, I'm seeing none, I think. And I think we have Autumn with us, who is straight from the 3-branch work group meeting earlier. Autumn, are you with us? Okay, it looks like she's not quite with us. I think she's very close. She's going to give us an update on a number of things, including legislative days and the 3-branch work group meeting. Autumn, are you there?
I'm here. Am I
All right,
unmuted?
there we go.
Sorry, I tried to transfer my computer and it did not work. So here I am on my phone, but in my office. So welcome everybody. Thanks for giving up your lunchtime to be here with us. Or maybe you're watching a recorded version, which good on you for choosing that choice. So I just got back from the most recent meeting of the 3-branch work group, but I am going to just kind of chronologically go back and talk about legislative days first. So legislative days are sort of like cycle of lead up into the next legislative session. A lot of times there's previews of things that are going to happen in the next coming 2023 legislative session, but it's a meeting over 3 days and it occurred last week. The various committees meet. Of interest to us particularly is that the House Judiciary Committee and the Senate Judiciary Committee both met each individually and did some informational hearings. As a part of that, Senator Przanski and Representative Evans, the co-chairs of the 3-branch work group, each gave updates along with the staff people from the 3-branch work group, Ami and Whitney, on what has been happening there. So if you watched that, sorry for the repeat, but I'm going to talk about that in the second part here. Also, during the legislative days, the agency presents to the emergency board. So I've talked about this before, but just because I like everyone to know what's going on, when we say e-board report, all of that, we're talking about the emergency board, which is basically what Ways and Means or the budget people kind of turn into during the time in between legislative sessions. And so the emergency board is, just as you hear it, for emergency funding for each entity that is coming before them to ask for emergency funding. You may have, if you're paying attention to the news, saw their allocations for various programs for, to feed hungry Oregonians, to increase hospital capacity. They did things like that. They have a limited pool of money. They don't have the full budget to work with. So our goals in going there are sometimes to ask for more money and sometimes to provide updates and reports. So as all agencies, we sometimes are required to just continually update the financial people at the legislature. So the majority of what we handled while we were there was that. We talked about the expansion of PCRP. That was one of the requests that we made to the emergency board. They did not take that under consideration during this last emergency board meeting. We reported on the updates and what we've been doing for planning as far as the Compliance Audit and Performance Division, also known as CAP. And we requested 3 positions as a part of that CAP build out. We actually were granted 1 position of the 3 we requested. And we also did a report on the mandates from the 50-30 budget notes on our reorganization and our financial update. If you recall, all of those obligations were set forth back in 2021. And as we move forward, we needed to report along the way and see how we're doing. We were released the $100 million SPA or hold back in our budget. That was released at the last e-board in June, but we still are required to continue to give these updates. So we did that. All of those things were accepted. So moving on from the legislative days and into the 3-branch work group, we continue to meet. We've been meeting since May, and today, the discussion was around ABA principle number 10, which is how they present it. The Sixth Amendment Center has been in charge of a lot of the presentation and a lot of the background on what we've been talking about. So they talked about accountability and supervision of defense counsel as their primary guidepost for this presentation. There was lots of interesting questions and discussion, a lot of discussion about where the system should go, what the Sixth Amendment Center thinks about where the system should go. If you've read the Sixth Amendment Center report, I think you know that they are talking about state employees and a slow move in that direction. So they continue to stay consistent in their messaging when they're talking with the 3-branch work group as well. So there's also today discussion about sub work groups, which are basically smaller pieces in order to talk about other items that have come up. So those right now are, there's 4 that they're talking about right now, but there may be more over the next day or so because there were some suggestions for others. But number 1 would be commission membership, the duties and the authorities, and the transfer of the PDSC and OPDS into the executive branch. That's one work group to be discussing that particular topic area. Another one is court efficiencies. They changed the name today to system efficiencies, so broader than just court. They also, so that's number 2. Number 3 is data collection and forecasting. So figuring out a little bit more about what we know, and what we don't know. So I think that that's an important thing for the legislature is that data collection and forecasting for future caseloads, because as we all know, we are not in charge ultimately of the full workload for defense counsel, because that's really in the hands of law enforcement and prosecutors. Number 4 is recruitment, retention, and workforce development, including conflict rules. So that is another sub-work group. Each of these sub-work groups, they're planning to have a number of members. They haven't given a defined amount, but as a part of that, they're asking for suggestions from work group members of who they think might be a good candidate who is not currently on this work group to be a part of a sub-work group. So I think especially people that are providers, you should probably be talking to the people that you know that are on the work group. I mean, I think just easily off the top of my head, we've got Rob Harris and we have Jessica Campy and we have Maylee Browning, we have Eva Ripito. All those people are there to help put that feedback in there. So let people know if you're dying to get involved in something like that. I'm sure they'll be doing their own outreach as well. So that's kind of where we're at. The work group is going to continue. I mentioned this last time around on my update. Contrary to what they originally thought, where they thought they were just going to take a break during 2023's legislative session, they are not going to do that. They are going to meet all the way through the legislative session. And the idea is that they will continue to work on long-term concepts and work on legislative concepts that may be implemented during the 2023 session. Right now, I think it's no secret that the writing's on the wall as far as the governance and a move for OPDS to go into the executive branch with PDSC going as well, obviously. And so that's kind of where it seems like they're headed as far as like what legislative concept is really kind of the most fleshed out. And hopefully there's going to be more. So that's kind of my brief update. I'm happy to answer questions to the degree I can. Some parts of the work group are, more open than other parts. So I'm a little limited in like how detailed I can get, but that I think gives everyone at least a broad overview. So I'm going to stop there and see if anybody wants to manage any questions that came up. I cannot see questions on my screen because I'm on my phone. So if anybody wants to tell me there's a question, they should tell me. Otherwise, I'm kicking it back.
Alina,
Yes.
should I answer this written question?
Yeah, so I guess if we're transitioning to the last agenda item, the Q&A, we did have one question in advance, submitted in advance. So if you wanted to do that, and then while we've been proceeding through the meeting, I also had received just a written comment, and I'm happy to read that aloud as well. But since we did get that first question in advance, yeah, we can read that. The question came from Bernie Brown of Bernard A. Brown Investigations. Is there any discussion for an increase in the base hourly rates for investigators and mitigators to cover the rising costs of doing business that's making it non-profitable?
And I guess the answer would be that the commissioners have acknowledged that the rates need to be increased, but their priority expressly stated has been on the unrepresented clients. I should also note that the policy option packages for the 2023 legislative session do include pay parity for support staff, for investigators, mitigators, case managers, as well as attorney compensation. And those are policy option packages 101 and 102. So I believe the idea is that, you know, everyone is supportive of increasing not only the attorney compensation, but also compensation for investigators and mitigators.
Thank you. And then I will go ahead and share for the group the other comment that was submitted during this call. It came from Jessica Garcia Parrott on behalf of Jack Morris. We are writing to address the proposal made yesterday at the PDSC meeting regarding recruitment bonuses for rural nonprofit public defender offices. We are a private firm rather than a nonprofit in the corporate sense. However, in every other aspect, we are the functional equivalent of a public defender's office and have been for over 30 years. We are the primary provider of indigent defense in the 7th Judicial District. We only do criminal and juvenile law and only a very small number of private cases. We do absolutely no civil, unlike some of the other law firms in the state. As head of the office, Jack participates in all of the stakeholder meetings and judicial projects in the district. Jack also routinely participates in statewide task force and committees. In fact, he is several years ago the head of a quality assurance task force that made site visits throughout the state. We recruit and train up new attorneys. We provide room for established attorneys to thrive. We have in-house investigation and bicultural staff. We have historically been a team member and in fact currently have several out-of-district cases, including a juvenile murder case. We have at times in the past been the go-to provider for cases needing attorneys primarily in Northeast Oregon. We are as much of a public defender's office as anyone. The only difference is that for over 30 years, we have used a business model that works for us and more importantly for our clients. We, just like our rural PD colleagues, are facing unprecedented recruitment difficulties, and it is highly inequitable that we should be excluded from this section of this proposed plan. Again, that was Jessica Garcia Parrott on behalf of Jack Morris.
I think with that, that brings us to the end of our agenda. Certainly, if anyone out there on the meeting with us has questions or comments that they'd like to share, we're always happy to hear those. If you don't want to do it here, you're always free to reach out to any of us at OPDS to provide that feedback or get questions answered. We're happy to do what we can to help. Does anyone have any questions or comments at this point? I am not seeing any. So with that, I think we can call this meeting to a close. Just want to remind everyone that the meeting is recorded, and the recording will be available with a copy of all the provider comments and questions and the responses on the OPDS website within 24 hours of this meeting conclusion. Thank you all.